It's noon on January 27th. Welcome everyone to the Wildfire Resiliency Code webinar that Picken County is hosting today. I want to introduce us here. My name is Nicole Rebeck Stout. I'm Deputy Director of the Community Development Department. We have Jeff Erickson. He's our Chief Building Official. John Houghton is our Building Division Supervisor. He will be helping us manage the chat today. And just some housekeeping stuff. I think Bonnie has everyone muted at this point in the meeting. And then you noticed that we started recording this webinar as well, so it's publicly available after today. We will try our best to get through our slides in a timely fashion. So we're going to save the questions and discussion for the end. However, if you want to add your questions as we go, John can start sort of organizing them into groups of topics. You're more than welcome to do that in the chat. Anything I missed before we dive right in? Okay, well, I'm gonna hand it over to Jeff.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm Jeff Erickson, Chief Building Official here at Picken County, and we'll jump right into the reason why we're all here today. You can go to the next slide there, Nicole. Thanks. May 12th, 2023, Senate Bill 23166 established a Wildfire Resiliency Code Board in the Division of Fire Prevention and Control to help enhance community safety and resiliency from wildfires through the adoption of codes and standards. So that's why we're all here today. Go to the next slide, please. This is the Picken County CWRC adoption milestones. On July 1st of 2025, the CWRC model code was adopted by the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board. Then fast forward to January 20th. Last week, we had a work session and P&Z meeting for the land use code and text amendments. Both those items are complete. Our next objective is the first reading for this code and public hearing, and that'll be on February 25th. Then hopefully second reading March 25th, and then the state deadline for adoption of the code is April 1st, and the code must take effect July 1st of 2026. Oh, can you go back to that slide? Sorry. I just wanted to mention that after the March 25th second reading, if it's approved by the BOCC, this ordinance will take effect 30 days after the public notice period. So we're looking at late April, early May for the code to take effect. Just a little bit of the Picken County wildfire background. Currently, all wildfire hazard requirements live in the land use code. I think all of you are familiar with that, but the CWRC is required now to be adopted into the building code. However, some of our current wildfire regulations are going to remain in the land use code. Those that are not specific to the CWRC. And I just wanted to clear that I'm using the acronym CWRC. So some of you may not know what that is. It's called Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code. Because this code must take effect no later than July 1st, 2026, we are creating a new section in the building code. It'll be section 11.35, and that's where the state mandated CWRC requirements are going to live. These requirements will become generally applicable to any building permit application submitted on or after the effective date, regardless of vested property rights, just like any other building or energy code. So a little bit about the content of the CWRC. Again, the model code is required to be adopted into the building code to become generally applicable. There is a statewide wildfire intensity mapping, so that's that's a bit of a change. Currently, we have wildfire mapping in Pickens County Maps and More, and that's been in our land use code since, I believe, 2006. So that's a big change. We're now moving to the state wildfire intensity mapping, which we'll get into in a little bit. The regulations for the state model code are based off the 2024 IWUIC and the Colorado State Forest Service, the Home Ignition Zone Guide. And again, all bodies, government bodies, are required to have this adopted and in the code by July 1st, 2026. So this is an overview of what is in the state model code and will also be implemented into our code. There's 5 chapters. The first is scope and administration, definitions, the identification of wildfire hazards areas, and the mapping. And then chapter 4 and chapter 5 are where the real material lies. Chapter 4 is structural hardening, so main building code requirements, and then the site and area requirements live in chapter 5. So we'll jump into what are the high level topics in chapter 1 that are of interest. The first would be section 101.3. This the regulations in the CWRC are intended to mitigate the risk to life and structures from the intrusion of fire from wildland fire exposures and fire exposures from adjacent structures, and to mitigate structure fires from spreading to wildland landfills. So this is what we're trying to accomplish with this code. The CWRC is not a retrofit code. This is a common misconception. However, if you do touch an existing building, these are the 3 main requirements. Starting with the roof, if you alter 25%, more than 25% or more of an exterior roof covering is altered, the entire roof should come up into compliance. And that's typically Class A, which we currently require in the land use code, and will stay the same with this code. The big change here is for exterior wall assemblies. If 25% or more of the surface area of an exterior wall of an existing building is altered, the entire building wall assemblies must be brought into compliance. And that's a big change. That is not something we currently require. Additions to existing buildings of 500 square feet or more must now comply, and interior alterations of existing structures are exempt from the wildfire code requirements. And you see at the bottom of each 3 of these requirements, we're calling out the code sections with which they live in chapter 1, in case you want to follow through in the draft code that we have available. I think John has dropped that draft code into the chat. Okay. So when is a new structure exempt from CWRC requirements? And there's only one exemption, and that's for detached, accessory, non-habitable structures such as tool and storage sheds, playhouses, and similar uses, provided the floor area does not exceed 120 square feet, and the structure is located greater than or equal to 10 feet from the nearest adjacent occupiable structure. Those are exempt. That's really the only exemption from wildfire requirements for new structures. The state modeled CWRC has an exemption for agricultural structures. We did some outreach with the community and the fire jurisdictions, and we thought that with the type of structures that are built, in Pickens County, agricultural structures, we felt that, at a minimum, those structures, if they're 50 feet, located at least 50 feet from a building containing occupiable or habitable space, and the building is located at least 50 feet from a property boundary, that we could reduce those requirements, from, say, class 2 or class 3 requirements, and just require class 1 requirements for those, specific structures. CWRC completely exempts them if they meet those requirements. But the Pickens County amendments to that section, will not exempt them. They'll reduce those requirements. So chapter 2's definitions, we won't really get into, all of the definitions, but I do have on the next slide, 3 that are really applicable to chapter 4, the structure hardening requirements of the wildfire code, and the materials that are used with exterior wall assemblies. The three main materials are non-combustible materials, fire retardant treated wood, and ignition resistant building materials. These are all defined in chapter 2. And like I said, they really apply to chapter 4 building materials, and give us a layout of what ASTM standards or flame spreads that are required for those specific materials. So we'll talk a little bit more about these 3 materials in chapter 4. Chapter 3 is wildfire hazard identification and mapping, and I'm going to hand this over to Nicole to talk a little bit about that section.
Thanks, Jeff. How are we doing on time? Okay, cool. Oh, okay, so this first image that we're looking at is a snippet of our existing wildfire mapping. You can see City of Aspen on the lower right-hand part of the screen. The CWRC fire intensity mapping is distinct from our current mapping. Both have 3 levels of intensity. This map you're looking at here shows low in the green, moderate in the peach color, and severe in the red. What we'll see in the CWRC, they also have 3 classifications: low, moderate, and high. And then the CWRC also has unmapped areas that's isolated in the Crystal Valley, the Airport Business Center, and parts of Emma Road, at least in the unincorporated area. So what you'll see here is a lot of red and orange, which red, like I said, is the high, orange is the medium fire intensity. You don't see low anymore, and you can scroll around the link that John put in the chat. The rest of Pickens County, we are only shown with medium and severe, or medium and high wildfire intensity. The model code, as it's written, does not apply to unmapped areas. Like I said, those are, you can see the City of Aspen is unmapped. That's out of our jurisdiction, but the Airport Business Center, which is more in the center of the screen. However, Pickens County currently regulates all areas for wildfire structure hardening and mitigation requirements. Staff coordinated with the fire districts to confirm that it is the best approach is for Pickens County to consider unmapped areas as medium fire intensity in terms of regulations. Also, you will see in the linked maps, there's 35-acre inholdings that are highlighted in pink if you're clicking around there. Those are also not regulated by the model code. And those regulations for structure hardening and defensible space are going to remain in the land use code, similar to how we regulate wildfire hazards today. This table is just indicating that there's two classifications of regulations in the model code. Class 1 is specific for low fire intensity, and then class 2 is for moderate and high fire intensity. As we discussed, we don't have any low fire intensity mapped areas in Pickens County. Therefore, as it's mapped and the regulations are drafted today, the entire county would be regulated under the Class 2 regulations, which is inclusive of the Class 1 regulations. We'll get to that when we get into structure hardening and site and area requirements. One other element in this chapter 3 that's important is this process for ground truthing. Many of you are familiar with the current process in the land use code where you can commission a wildfire expert to document a wildfire analysis that's site specific. Oftentimes that analysis results in either confirming the wildfire hazard classification or dropping it down a level. So in the model code, this process is referred to as ground truthing. So that'll be the new language we'll use. This process is preferred to be completed during the planning process. And I think that's a win for everyone. That way your project will be more prepared, knowing what regulations will apply to you when it comes to the building permit process. And as we talked about, moderate and high intensity classifications are subject to the same regulations. So I'm imagining if you're going through this process, you're going to be shooting for a low intensity class. And then I will just state we baked into the code that the fire districts will determine if the ground truthing report will be accepted or not. And then there's a lot of other details we need to work on with the fire district about making this process come to life. And I won't have all the answers today, but if you have questions, you're welcome to ask. I'm gonna keep going because the next chapter is for Jeff to cover.
Great. Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah.
So, chapter 4, structure hardening, that's where all of the requirements for the building are, it's where they live. Go to the next slide here. As Nicole mentioned, in the CWRC, there's 3 levels of wildfire classification: low, moderate, and high hazard areas. But there's really only 2 levels of code requirements. You have Class 1, which is basically just roofs, gutters, downspouts, and vents. And then you have Class 2, which has all of those requirements, plus projections at the roof line, eaves and soffits, exterior walls and projections, underfloor enclosure to the ground, decking materials, and covers windows and doors. So it's important to note here that while there is a Class 1 code requirement, as Nicole mentioned, there is no low fire hazard areas in Pickens County currently. And if you want to be classified as such, you would have to do the ground truthing exercise to lower that requirement. Also, the ground truthing doesn't just omit you from having to comply with the code. It just allows you to move from moderate or high hazard areas down to a low fire hazard area. We created some slides to kind of give a visualization of a home and what the requirements are for each. So if you see 403 here, that's Class 1 requirements. So that well, Class 1 and Class 2. So, but specifically 403 is for Class 1. You see Class A roof assembly now has an ASTM standard or UL standard to achieve that with your building materials. And then this roof valley flashing is a new requirement in CWRC. Getting into vents and gutters, ventilation openings covered in Class 1 here has the ASTM standard. I believe this is a 1/4 inch in the current land use code, and now we're moving that opening size down to an 1/8 inch. So that's a different requirement than what we currently require. Protection of eaves and soffits shall be protected by, here's those, the three definitions that we talked about earlier, non-combustible material, fire retardant treated wood, ignition resistant material. So you're gonna go back to definitions to find those ASTM standards. Fascias are now required and shall be protected on the backside by materials that are listed above, excluding fire retardant treated wood. Gutters and downspouts. This is also a new requirement. Class 1 and Class 2 is required to have non-combustible materials that meet that ASTM standard. Exterior walls, we now have a minimum of 6 inches of metal flashing or non-combustible material that's applied between the wall sheathing and the exterior cladding. And it should be on the ground and at roof or deck intersections. Exterior walls and projections shall be constructed with the following materials: non-combustible, fire retardant treated wood, ignition resistant materials, 1 hour fire resistant rated materials, or heavy timber or log wall construction. So it's fairly similar to the land use code, only we're now having more options for materials and actual standards that we can follow to those materials that you choose, that those standards will be able to say that they meet those standards. Windows, doors, and decks. Decking, now, again, we have more materials that we can choose from: non-combustible, Class A rated, composite decking material with a minimum Class B, fire retardant treated wood, or ignition resistant building materials. Exterior glazing, this is the big one. In severe wildfire areas currently, all those areas are required to have tempered glass. The CWRC now includes multi-layered glazed panels, glass block, or to have a rating of not less than 20 minutes. So again, more options. Exterior doors are covered here, and 404 as well. Non-combustible materials, solid core wood not less than 1 3/4 inches thick, or a fire protection rating of not less than 20 minutes. And then the windows within the doors and glazed doors shall be in accordance with 404.7, which is exterior glazing section. Underfloor enclosures. Buildings or structures shall have underfloor areas enclosed to the ground or comply with the exterior walls in accordance with section 404.3, which is that previous side. Enclosed, if the underfloor enclosure is enclosed to the ground, it needs to comply with the exterior wall or projection section. And I'll hand it back to Nicole to get into chapter 5.
Site and area requirements. This is a lot of defensible space if you need a translation. So, as we have discussed, the state is requiring the CWRC to be adopted in the building code, meaning some of the regulation topics that are currently in the land use code need to be moved over. And it makes sense, right? Having roofing and structure hardening content in the building code. We want to reiterate that wildfire hazards will remain a critical aspect of the activity envelope and site plan process. That's in the land use review. We have created a wildfire regulation summary table. I think John provided a link to that. That reviews changes to the code as it relates to our existing code. So what's moving to the building code, what's staying in the land use code by topic. So that's a pretty easy way to navigate sort of the big picture. Many of the wildfire regulation topics important to the state and the State Forest Service are currently a component of our existing family of regulations. So it's sort of this exercise of just putting the right regulation in the right place and being in compliance with the state. So this table here is showing the list under the chapter 5 site and area summary. This list includes the topics that will be in the building code. And then the land use changes summary. This is a list of what's happening in the land use code. So in terms of our exemption process, we currently, as it's written in the code 71030, we do not permit exemption letters to be issued for properties that are mapped in severe wildfire hazard. I think the story with this whole project is no one can avoid this hazard. And so we need to be vigilant about mitigating for the hazard in terms of structure hardening and defensible space. So exemption letters will be explicitly permitted in any wildfire hazard area. Ground truthing we talked about earlier, that process is articulated to be prioritized in the planning review process. And I think that's a win for everyone. I'd love to get your thoughts. Like I said, the regulations for the 35-acre and holding properties will remain in the land use code. Surprisingly, the CWRC did not address water supply for fire safety, fuel storage, and ongoing maintenance requires explicitly in the code. So those will remain in the land use code. And then I'm going to go through the class 5 list on these next slides. So these zone 1 through 3, the CWRC refers to these as the immediate zone, intermediate, and expanded zone. These are the defensible space zones. You'll see that the immediate zone is the only requirement for class 1. If you can get your ground truthing to coordinate that for your property, that's what you would be subject to, just that 0 to 5 feet. Otherwise, every project is going to be subject to all 3 of these. The intermediate zone is 5 to 30 feet, and the expanded zone goes out to 100. So 1 by 1, 0 to 5 feet. There's a priority for having non-combustible and hard surface materials, no planting except ignition resistant planting. Our definition that we're working on clarifies that Colorado's State Forest Service ignition resistant planting guide, which I believe you have a link from John. I can't remember if it's a score of like 8 or more. It's considered ignition resistant. That's a great starting place. Other planting could be accepted in this area as well. And then no new trees and requirements to prune trees. The other class 1 requirements are site signage to mark fire protection equipment, such as a dry hydrant. Clarifying that retaining walls are non-combustible. If it is related to being in proximity to the house, property line, or the driveway, and then fencing being non-combustible in terms of within 8 feet of the house. I'm moving on to the next zone, 5 to 30 feet. A lot of these requirements you're familiar with from the land use code. There might be some tweaks in terms of the dimensions, but we're really following the Colorado State Forest Service home ignition zone guide here for these dimensions. I will have all the landscape architects know on the call that I really scoured that report to find those those details for dimensions that allow for tree and shrub groupings as opposed to the isolated plants, which I think is in the model code. So we have adjusted the model code to be more generous in terms of doing individual plants or groupings. Now we're out to the zone 3. This is just more defensible space guidance to slow an approaching fire. Another topic that was not in the CWRC but was part of the State Forest Service guide was defensible space around driveways. We thought, along with the fire districts, that this is important to include because I'm sure many of you are familiar with a project in the county with a very lengthy driveway. So a defensible space around a structure won't be too useful if there's not a way for emergency services to access that structure. So you will see a section about defensible space around driveways. And then the other section that we added is forest management typologies. The model code is based on ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, and mixed conifer forest ecosystems. And then just acknowledging we have other forest ecosystems in the county, and there's little tweaks to how to treat defensible space in those ecosystems. For example, for an aspen, a mature aspen stand, you'd really just be clearing out the underbrush as opposed to creating those groupings. So there's some more latitude to customize the defensible space. That is the end of my chapter 5 spiel. This is a screenshot from our active projects webpage, which I think you also have a link from John. This is really a great place to stay in touch with what's happening with this project. Just this morning, we posted links to our draft building code and draft land use code amendments that will be going to the board February 25th. And then also please sign up for our Vision 2050 newsletter. And with that, if you're okay, I'm very impressed with our time. It's only 12:33. So I'd love to just go through our discussion approach. So I noticed that folks were adding comments or questions to the chat. So we'll go through those together. And then I'm not sure how many folks wanted to speak, but just being mindful to make sure everyone has a chance to be succinct if you can. And then there's some folks who might have a question we won't be able to answer today, or might not really be relevant for the group, in which case we'll guide you to do our office hours that are this afternoon and also next Tuesday. So with that, should we, I don't know if it's helpful to take people off mute and then go through the questions.
Yeah, I've got some
John?
questions in the chat. Do you want me to read some of them out for you guys?
Sure. And then sorry, Bonnie, is everyone muted or not? I just wanted to know in case.
Yes, they are. They're gonna have to raise their hand and then we'll promote them.
Got it. Okay, so if John reads one of your questions and you want to clarify and speak, please raise your hand. Thank you.
My first question is about insurance. So, it's from Sam Barney. There's a concern that maybe this updated map could lead to insurers dropping out of our market. And not people not being able to get insurance anymore, and wondering if the insurance industry was in on the development of these regulations.
Well, actually, I remember we covered this in the workshop that we did in October with the other jurisdictions in the state and the fire districts. And this was something that I was super concerned about and worried about if we wanted to, increase people's levels of intensity or to something to that effect. And what the state assured us that the insurance companies are not using this map for insurance purposes. And I believe that there's like an Office of Insurability that the state has, and there's rules about what resources the insurance companies can use for their policies. And we were assured that this map is not one of the resources for insurance companies to leverage dropping policies or making them more expensive. I don't have the most exact response for that, but if you would like to connect with the folks at the state, maybe I can find some contact information. But that's as far as my knowledge goes.
And my understanding is that there was a representative from the insurance industry on the state board that developed this code.
Mhm. Okay, I hope that helped. I don't see anyone else raising their hand.
Let's see, we've got a question from Jonathan Losky. Can the zones be increased based on site-specific conditions such as steep slopes, dense timber fuels identified at ground truthing? And then regarding typologies, what about shrublands, i.e. gamble oak, sagebrush, etc.?
Okay, so ground truthing to increase the fire intensity. Yeah, I don't know where that would get us, John, because we only have mapped moderate or high. So if you go from moderate to high, you're in the same regulation.
Well,
Sorry, yes.
yeah, just to clarify, I mean, there's times when I make recommendations that go above and beyond what, the State Forest Service recommends, because, they're at the top of a very steep slope that is covered in, dense gamble oak. And so, if it's at all possible, I recommend that they do fuel reductions as far out as they possibly can, like out to the property line, or maybe even up to like 200 feet. Because, if a fire is, if there's a fire start at the bottom or an ignition source at the bottom, like I think of along, Red Mountain, you've got the Rio Grande Trail at the bottom, somebody flicks a cigarette out over there and, that fire flies up that hillside. So I've made recommendations that are above beyond that 100-foot recommendation. Is still okay?
Yeah, I think my understanding of the way the ground truthing works is it's really just to either confirm or challenge the fire intensity classification. However, I do know that that's currently how our wildfire analysis process works, is it's a site-specific requirements are you're putting together very site-specific recommendations to mitigate the fire hazard. Whereas I don't think the ground truthing, the way it's currently written, has that breadth of scope. However, since the fire departments will be reviewing your recommendations, I would imagine that they would accept your great ideas, Jonathan. But like I said, we want to dig into that ground truthing process in collaboration with the fire districts, and would love to include you and some others who are on our wildfire expert list to kind of get organized about how that's going to work. And we're just not there yet, Jonathan.
Understood. I'll just say one thing maybe to consider is that we could meet these, minimum standards within the land use and building process, and then just do a separate, wildfire mitigation plan for each landowner if they have severe conditions on their property.
Following up on the ground truthing, Eric asks, will existing wildfire experts be allowed to do ground truthing and prepare reports, or do they need to go through additional steps?
Also something we need to coordinate with the fire districts. I think there was some energy around standardizing the process of doing the ground truthing. And that's just been identified as something to explore, but we don't have any details about that quite yet.
Yeah, there's not a definition in the CWRC of what a qualified wildfire professional is. It would just be up to the determination of myself and the fire jurisdiction code official.
More to come.
There's another question about federal lands. Does the code affect federal lands? If they're outside the jurisdiction, then why is there an intensity level assigned to them on the map?
So if you go to the CWRC map and the about the map section, it does say that the cross hatched areas, although they do have a class associated, that the mapping and the wildfire requirements do not apply to those areas. However, we're working with the county attorneys to figure out what exactly that means for specific properties or that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, we are working. So the practice currently, I think it's helpful to start with where we are today. Currently, we regulate development in the federal lands. Primarily, those are Aspen Skiing Company projects. And so, yeah, we are working, like Jeff said, we just need to figure out how to move that practice forward in the new the family of regulations. And you'll notice if you pop open Jeff's draft of his building code, there's a section that's reserved for federal lands that's under review with the county attorney. So also more to come on that.
The code doesn't explicitly state that those areas are exempt, but the map does. So we're just trying to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
But it is on our list.
That's all the questions we had in the chat. I don't know if people want to raise their hands. If they have further questions or throw them in the chat.
I'll raise mine.
Well, I'd hate to end early since you have us. I guess maybe we'll just go into next steps and, oh, I see. Okay, we'll go to Jonathan after I do this.
I don't think you guys hit on the typologies only included forest. You didn't address shrublands.
Oh, yes, thank you for, I knew you asked two questions and I bailed on your second one. I'm sorry. Okay, so in terms of Gamble Oak, that is addressed in zone 2 and zone 3 regulations. I feel like I just wanna actually open the code and go to that section since we have time. Let's see. And Jonathan, I'm not an expert in forest typologies and how to deal with the defensible space. But I studied the home ignition zone guide and I pulled forward all their, forest typologies. Let's see. I suppose that they would be subject just to the shrub spacing from trees and the shrub group spacing. And then, oh, here's a comment about Gamba oak pruning. And then we're going into zone 3. I think zone 3 just talks about trees. So I guess, Jonathan, it'd be helpful if you read through this, and if, you know, like I said, I tried to be a student to the home ignition zone guide, but certainly if I was misinterpreting something, please let me know. Did you see how I, clicked over here?
Yeah.
All right, we got another question from Luis Menendez. The code currently allows wood siding to be used over type X drywall. Will that remain an option, or will wood siding be prohibited?
Luis, 40431, of the model code, talks about exterior wall coverings, and it's pretty exclusive. It says exterior wall coverings shall be limited to the following, and it's non-combustible material, fire retardant treated wood, or ignition resistant building material. So to answer your question, that is not an option. The wood would have to be fire retardant treated.
Okay, 10 more minutes. I'm happy to end early, but we can also scroll through the code text, if that's helpful, or the land use code. Whatever you find most helpful. And just another plug, if you're sort of sitting on a question and thinking you just want to ask it in a different venue, please sign up for a 20-minute office hours this afternoon or next Tuesday. We'd be happy to spend the time with you.
Or if you have some questions that you're not really sure are questions yet, you structure hardening questions can come to me at builderoftheday@pickenscounty.com, and we can dive into those specific questions with the building department. And then for site and area, defensible space questions, Nicole, or is it just your email, or is it planner of the day?
My email. Yeah.
All right, we have a request to show slide for zone 3 requirements
Oh,
again.
I just went to slide 3. And the other thing I didn't get too detailed about is the adjustment, the defensible space adjustments for steep slopes. So, you know, a lot of these defensible space diagrams are showing, oh, look, it's a flat property. And when you study the topography in Pickens County, there's a lot of development either on steep slopes or in proximity of steep slopes. And we all know that slopes sort of, increase. So, in zone 2, I'm gonna go back to zone 2. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. We worked with the fire districts to think about what the right defensible space is for slopes and put it in the code as opposed to, thinking about each property individually, when there's so many properties that have slopes over 30%. So just to standardize, the fire district supported expanding zone 2 to 100 feet when there's slopes over 30% on the downhill side. And then if there's slopes on the uphill side, also expanding it to 100 feet if there's development upslope. If there's no development upslope, it's it's US forest land or some other condition where there's no development upslope, then zone 2 would maintain that 30 feet defensible space area on the uphill side. So hopefully that sort of streamlines the expectations for defensible space. And again, the fire districts supported that approach.
We had a question on the underfloor enclosure, coming from Aaron Schaefer. Does that area have to be enclosed to the ground? And does that apply to decks? If so, is there a height limit?
Aaron, 404.4 underfloor enclosure covers this. Buildings or structures shall have underfloor areas enclosed to the ground or comply with the exterior walls section. So the answer is yes, the deck would have to be enclosed to the ground. And there is not, I think the other part of that question was the height limit. There's not a height limit.
Here's another question. When would you like us to start incorporating this information to applications, reports, and submittals?
Really great question. So we are meeting with our development services team in the coming weeks to make a plan for that. For the land use application side, we would like to review the site and area compliance during the planning review step and get that as recorded on the Mylars. I think that helps in the building permit process to have that all sort of vetted and confirmed for compliance when it comes time for permit. So my thinking right now is that at some point when applications come in for completeness review during the intake process, if after this code is in effect, we would essentially just request that compliance with Chapter 5 in the building code for site and area at that time, prior to your land use application being reviewed, for other code compliance. So I hope that makes sense. Essentially, it's going to be, I don't know if we're going to treat it like a deficiency if you don't have it, or if there's going to be another mechanism to catch that, to make sure that our planners are reviewing that moving forward. That's a detail we need to work on with the development services team. And I think similarly, adding a requirement, or I don't know how many requirements to the pre-submittal meeting.
Pre-submittal checklist.
Yeah, the pre-submittal checklist. I think the benefit of having the site and area reviewed in planning is we could record that on the Mylar, the activity envelope and site plan Mylar. That way you actually don't have another submission requirement. That Mylar becomes the compliance with chapter 5. But again, that is our development services. We have a lot to go through with development services in terms of application requirements, permit requirements, review process, coordinating with the fire district. There's probably a flow chart in there somewhere.
We have a question about zone 1 requirements. Can you verify or expand on the zone 1 requirements for landscaping adjacent to the house?
Yeah. Zone 1 is, let's see. I wonder actually what would be more helpful is if I just go to the code. I'm just gonna go to the code. For zone 1. Okay, the immediate zone. So this is clarifying it's 0 to 5 feet. You're using non-combustible hard surface materials. It clarifies rock, gravel, sand, concrete, bare earths. Not a fan of that. Or stone and concrete pavers are acceptable. Removing all plants except these, I don't think it's hard to put together a planting plan with this ignition resistant plantings list if that's part of your design concept. It's just that the mulch, you'll have to consider your mulching approach with it's not ideal. I understand that. This is from the state. So, I feel like I sprinkled in a lot of other wins in here, but maybe I won't get appreciated for that. So yes, I look forward to your creativity with that, zone 1. Trees, so no new trees. But if you do have an existing tree with a 10-inch diameter trunk, then you can maintain it. So that's helpful. And then pruning your tree crowns to have a distance of 10 feet, 10-foot clearance.
Thanks, Nicole. Can I just jump in for a sec?
Please.
So I think the clarification, I've got a project, I'm a landscape architect, Land Design 39, and just have a project where the fire department has said that we must do 2 feet of gravel around the house and that the other 3 feet has to have like nothing in it. So I guess it was more of a clarification for, that's specific, but it was, trying to meld both the fire department's requirements and these new requirements. And just understanding if we could do ignition resistant plants like in that whole 5-foot zone, then if that's amenable to both you and the fire department, since it was specific fire department directives on that.
Will you tell me the fire district?
Old Snowmass.
So Roaring Fork Fire and
Yes.
Rescue.
Yep.
Yeah, so like we said at the top, the fire districts also need to adopt this code. And this is what the model code says for that 0 to 5 feet. So I'm not sure where you are in the construction component, but if you like this better,
Yes.
maybe good, something's better.
Thanks for the help.
And are you working with Brooke?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and also we're happy to jump in so it's not so confusing about what your reg is. So if you wanna connect someone here with Brooke to get to the conclusion, we're happy to do that.
Awesome. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thanks for your question. Okay, well, it looks like it's one. I was thinking that we could wrap up. With
One more.
one more. If people have time, there's one more question. We did block extra time, so we're gonna stay. And again, if you have to drop off, this will be recorded. So if you have FOMO, you can go to the recording.
Regarding the underfloor enclosure, the structure used to frame the deck or the projection is fire resistant treated wood or other non-combustible material. Does it have to have the underfloor enclosure?
Let's go to slide 26. So it says it is enclosed to the ground or in compliance with 404.3, which is on 25. Go to 25. Slide before this one. Yeah. I'm sorry.
My bad.
Yeah, so you can use non-combustible material. Is the question fire retardant? Yes, you can. Heavy timber. You can use heavy timber. Okay.
And you don't have to extend.
Correct. Yeah, you don't have to extend it to the ground.
Was that our last question, John?
That's all I see, yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna start wrapping up and again, you can always go back and reference this presentation. We'll post it on the website we were just looking at. And so as of today, all of our draft codes are on the web. Please look at them. Send us your thoughts. We are in our referral process right now with our caucuses. In anticipation of going to the Board of County Commissioners on February 25th. It's first reading and public hearing. So if you feel so inclined to show up and convey your support for this code, please do so. And then the public hearing will be continued to second reading on March 25th, where we will hope to have these codes adopted. Like Jeff said, the code will then go into effect 30 days after noticing, which will be late April, early May. More to come about the details for ground truthing, more to come about all of our development services, application requirements and process. So stay tuned for that. Any final words from you all?
No, thank you all for joining in.
Yes, thank you so much.